This is going to be Silica, the new federal rules. It will be a panel discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Clovis Bayless, and I work for AGC of Kansas. I do safety and workforce development.
Cody Arnold, I work for Tactical Safety Solutions. Spent 6 years now in the safety industry. Started out with UCI and then switched over to technical the last couple of years.
Hi guys, I'm Luke Carey. I'm the safety director for UCI. We do a lot of construction work in the Midwest, so happy to be here. Thanks.
My name is Matt Lashley. I'm the safety director at Drywall Systems. I'm also the chairman of the safety committee at AGC. So just a quick invite if you guys want to get involved with that. We can send out the information so that everybody can have it so that they can become a part of that too. So
Thank you. Okay. We were told that I'd do a presentation on Silica, the new standards, and panel. So we thought we'd cover some of the highlights of it and then open it up for questions. So when you're talking about OSHA's standards, what is the best resource for OSHA standards? This is supposed to be interactive.
OSHA website.
Good job. All right. So we thought we'd introduce it, but we'd actually show the standard so you can actually see in black and white what it says. OSHA standards, for the most part, are very, as they say, ambiguous, open for interpretation, which opens a lot of discussion. So we thought this would be a good place to start. So when you're talking about Silica and the standard for an employer, what is the first step? What do you think?
Know your exposure.
Do you have an exposure, right? So right here in 1926-1153, it actually says the employer shall assess the exposure of any employee who is or what? May be exposed to silica. So how many people actually know what silica is? Okay. So silica is found where?
everywhere.
Everywhere. The most common place it's found is in quartz. What's quartz? Sand, dirt, right? So does that mean if a website, if some wind blows across and some sand's blowing, that you're exposed to silica? Yes? No?
Probably.
No. What it's talking about is called respirable silica. So what is respirable silica? It's silica that is small enough that it can be breathed into the lungs. So how do you get it that small? You do what? I'm sorry? Yeah, absolutely. Cutting, crushing, demoing, grinding, right? So in long and short, the exposure is, do you cut, grind, do any of those operations to any type of quartz? In construction sites, the most common is in concrete. So do you do those activities? Yes, sir.
So you're telling me if you're standing on the downwind side of the Kansas wind of all these sand piles in town, they're blowing all over the place?
Yes, sir.
That's not considered that you can handle that?
It's respirable, has to be small enough that it actually gets lodged into your lungs. It actually goes into lungs, and yeah, so no, on the most part it doesn't. Unless you have trucks driving across all the time on sand, right?
Well, I'm just wondering. I mean, if it's light enough to blow.
Respirable silica is actually like 1/100th the size of a piece of sand.
Yep.
So it's going to be much smaller than actually the grain of sand.
You can't actually see it. But then I have
like Clovis said, I mean, if you've got trucks that are running, through that job site and they're actually grinding that sand up over time, and it does become small, particles that are small enough to be actually respirable, like Clovis was saying, then at that point, yes, you are susceptible.
That's why your watering trucks, if you do have a lot of heavy road work coming in and out, that's when you would wet down those roads. Help with that. Okay. Good question. Did we answer it?
I don't believe it, but yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
No, I'm just kidding.
I don't care. Believe me or not. Because whenever Mr. OSHA is standing there, I'm not going to answer the questions. So, okay. So that's the first step. Do you have an exposure? And it says that if you do, you have to do a performance or monitoring. So what is a performance or monitoring? It talks about monitoring. You shall perform an initial monitoring of 8 hours TWA, time weighted average. So do you have to actually do a monitoring? You have to go and hire someone to come out and do monitoring. That's the question. What was the first thing it says? Performance. So what's the performance? Shall assess and a basis of a combination of monitoring or performance of data. Where it says objective data. What's objective data? Someone's already done it for you, right? So, this is, everyone's heard of table 1, correct? Of Silica? Yes, no?
Yes.
What has happened is that OSHA has already had people go out and collect data on most common activities on a job site involving silica. They have embedded this into the standard to show these activities, which are very common, you don't have to do it, they've done it for you, so you can use this data. So, each employer or each employee engaged in those activities, and you implement this table, it says that you have met the obligation of protecting your employees. Example, how do you use this? What's the activity? Stationary masonry saws. What's those? Sorry? Yeah, it's those stationary, those block saws, things of that nature, where it's fixed. You throw the block under it, and you cut it. If you do that, and this is very important, you have to implement engineering or work controls. For this particular stationary masonry saw, what is the engineering controls? Integrated water delivery and operate it in accordance to manufacturer. If you do that, you have to use any respirator if you do it for under 4 hours. Nope. What about if you do it over 4 hours? Nope. So let's change to one that everyone does. Handheld saws. Does anyone use a quickie saw? Yeah. So with a quickie saw, what do you have to do? What engineering? Water. You have to use it in accordance to the manufacturer. Well, this doesn't have vacuum, but I know that they have some quickie saws out there with vacuum now. Does that mean I can do that? Yeah. Because you're using it in accordance to the manufacturer. As long as you do that, you've met it. If you use it outdoors under 4 hours, do you have to use a respirator? Nope. What about over 4 hours outside? Do you have to? Yep. But how many are you going to have employees working 8 hours on a quickie saw? Hopefully none, right? If you do need it done for 8 hours, find a couple of guys. You know, I'm sure there's a couple of guys that get on your list there. What about inside? Under 4 hours, you have to use a respirator. Yes, you do. What about over? Okay, pretty simple. You guys know how to use table 1? It's not difficult, right? Now, what if you're doing something that does not listed in table 1? What do you have to do? Anyone?
Follow the manufacturer's guideline.
Okay, you're going to do that anyway, right? But are they going to be exposed to dust? Yes or no?
Yes.
That's correct. Where is it?
You have a question?
Yeah, isn't there only one lab in the United States that actually does the testing for OSHA? There isn't.
That does it for OSHA?
Well, that's certified to do it. We have a safety class at Pittsburgh State, and just this last semester I was in that class, and we were told that there is only one lab in all of the continental U.S. that actually does that.
That
True
currently
study.
meets the requirements,
The
yes.
test of the
But for the laboratory testing, that is not, doesn't have to be put in place yet. Laboratories are one of the last things put in place standard-wise.
Okay.
And what they're talking about is the testing is for the amounts.
Right. If you're over or below 4 micron.
Right. What the PELs that are listed is permissible exposure limit. The PEL is 50 micrograms. Okay? There are several laboratories that can test to that small, but the second test that you have to test for is for the action level. What's the action level amount? 25 micrograms. That's where the question is, there's not many laboratories that can actually test to that small, and that's what they're talking about. To get to that small test of that 25 micrograms, that's the difficulty. So, most of the tests that have been done, how many have done tests? Does it actually get down to telling you the action level amount?
No, it just, ours just told us that it didn't, it was below the amount.
Yeah, so they can't actually test to that. So yes, there is problems with that. Okay, so if you cannot, if you're doing activities not in the table, you have to do an actual monitoring, right? Because the question, burden of proof of are your employees exposed to the PEL or action level is up to the employer, correct? So how do you know? There's no dust, right? So I'm good. The burden of proof is on you. Let's see. If you do a test, when a recent exposure of the monitoring is above the PEL, you have to repeat it within 6 months. If you do and it comes out below, you have to repeat the test. You have 2 consecutive tests below the action level. You can't test it within 7 days. If it's, if it's above the action level but below the PEL, it's 6 months, and if it's above the PEL, it's 3 months. Then you have to do a retest. All right. It talks about the different types of exposures. If you have to use a respirator, the respirator program kicks in and you have to comply with it. And it talks about that. Okay, another one is housekeeping. Here's the one that all employees love. You can't make them push the broom. That's dry sweeping. You can't have dry sweeping if there's a possibility of exposure or something. You have to use some type of wet method or to eliminate the dust. No compressed air. So guys can't blow themselves off with compressed air. That's above 100 PSI. All right. The last is if you do have employees that are exposed above the pale, or if you're using table 1, are you not saying that you are above the pale? That's why you're using it, you have exposure. Then your medical surveillance kicks in, and you have to have medical surveillance on employees that work in, around, above the pale 30 days. So then you have to implement the medical surveillance.
And it has to be made available to
Yep.
the employees. You can't mandatory make them go, but it has to be made available to the employees for medical evaluation.
That's a lot of the highlights. Now we're going to open it up for everyone else. So, questions, please.
What enforcement have you guys seen from OSHA in regards to the new Silica standard?
It's, well, with UCI, we're a BPP company, so they come in and they do schedule audits with us. A lot of it, more than anything right now, I think, is your records. The type of records that you have as far as your medical evaluations. If you've done testing, like for us, we try to go above and beyond as much as possible. So for us, we use table 1, and then we've also done the testing as well. That way we have that testing to back up any tasks that we perform that may possibly not be on table 1. And then it goes to your respiratory program as well, because I think what a lot of people don't correspond with is the Silica standard as being one standard and the respiratory program being separate, but technically they're really one program. And I don't really want to get into the respiratory program because there's a lot that's involved with it, but a lot of it I think is your record keeping. As of right now, I think they're really trying to ease into the actual job site portion of it and making sure that they are mandating, you know, the proper use of table 1, the proper use of your actual records that you have, that you have completed.
Also, about 6 months ago, we had a lunch and learn. OSHA, Ryan Hodge, the area director, was there, and that question was asked, and it was kind of discussed upon, kind of like what this gentleman said, is they're going to get all their crews up to date, and then they're going to ease into it, but probably the best way to do it is to beat them to the punch. You have to get sampling done, get it done. It's inexpensive, you know, and if the tests come back good, then you're set, you're ahead of the game, because, you know, if they decide they want to come in and start going, they're going to go. And if you haven't, you know, followed table 1, done your research, done your training, training's a big, huge part of that also. Training all your employees on the Silica test, the hammer drilling, concrete, all that. It is really important on making sure that all employees are trained on that. So, you know, that's something until they roll it out and they start enforcing it, that's something that needs to be done anyway. Kind of like Close was talking about on the housekeeping and all that, you know, floor sweep works well. So, I mean, you don't need to throw down a whole bunch of water and mop it up, but floor sweep works well on that for that. But Brian did say that they are going to start enforcing it.
Thank you. I did not touch about employee training. Employee training is required for any employee who works in and around it. What is Silica, the effects, the dangers, how to protect themselves. You're also required to have a competent person on the site. So, and they have to understand this and how to control the dust. As far as enforcement, I do work with the area office often and talk with the area director. The problem is they have no compliance officers who have a history or experience in construction. So when they step out on the site, they see dust. We have to be able to articulate there's no hazard. So we have to understand the Silica, the standard, what our portion is. The second one is what's going to delay that enforcement a little bit is right now they're understaffed. They currently have are supposed to have 13 compliance officers. I think they're down to 7 in Kansas. That's the entire state. So that's a problem. So that's going to be, they're going to get someone in, and they're not going to get someone with construction experience because obviously they don't pay enough. So none of us are going to leave and go over there. So it's going to be an education portion. We're going to have to make sure that we understand what the hazards are, what our responsibilities are, so that if we do get someone on the site that does try to enforce it, because they see dust, we have to be able to protect ourselves. Thank you. Anything else? Questions?
I was gonna say one thing real quick. Well, it's kind of going along with that too, is we just, on the training that OSHA's receiving, we just had a job site that OSHA was on, and it took them a month to review. I mean, we didn't get any citations, but it took them a month of going back and talking about the job site with the other OSHA inspectors on what they could find. And so, you know, I don't think that they knew exactly what they were looking for, but if they assume something, you know, they have months to take pictures, investigate it, go back, talk, until you even actually find out you're going to get citations.
6 months. They have 6 months to issue a citation. Jamie?
Have you seen anything maybe regionally, not necessarily Kansas, but, you know, it sounds great that, you know, it should have 13 inspectors and we've only got 7, but if they're uneducated, you know, a lot of this is up to interpretation. And
it is.
I mean, what are you seeing in other areas that, you know, people that are getting fined, people that, I mean, you got to put a lot of effort in. I mean, you can
Sure.
spend a ton of money on this and still not comply. What are you seeing as far as, you know, citations, or if people are getting, you know, written up for, I mean, is it consistent or is it all over the board?
It goes by area. It goes back to the compliance officer are exactly this, just like we're the some experience of our some of our experience and knowledge. For safety, I always say it's aesthetics. You walk on a job, it looks good, it must be good. So you don't get into some of the questions and digging deeper. So with that being said, a compliance officer steps on a job site, they see dust, they see this, they see that. What is that going to have them do? They start digging in deeper. Currently, I'm not aware of any citation for Silica. What I have heard is they're not real familiar, no one opened that door, because then they have to do testing and to prove it and things of that nature. But what they do is, then they'll get you for the respirator, they'll get you for housekeeping, they'll get you for the other things that they're more familiar with.
And that's part of the reason that they have that 6 months as well, because they can go to, you know, outside third-party professionals that deal with it, you know, day in and day out. They can get their take on the matter. That's why they give themselves that time, so they can actually do the research that they need to do to be able to come back to give you an educated evaluation.
Also along that is failure to train is one of those things that they will pick up faster than about anything else. That's one that they can, you know, they don't have to actually observe it. They can ask you for your records. Well, you know, I didn't know I had to train something. You're hit. So that's the easiest thing probably to be able to just get right from the beginning is training.
Written program, training, respiratory, that's what they're hitting for, not having a Silica in place.
A competent person, that's a really big one as well. Because a lot of people miss that. They just see that we have to train people on it, so they'll do a monthly training topic or whatever it may be, but they don't actually add that competent person training to their yearly matrix like they should.
The standard also talks about it's not just the person doing the activity, it's anyone that can be exposed. So if you have someone with a quickie saw actually cutting something, and the wind's blowing downwind away from them, they're not exposed, you don't have to do anything, right? Wrong, because because you have employees working downwind. And that's also reversed. If you're not doing any activity, but someone else is, and your employees are exposed to it, you can be cited also.
Well, and if you're going by table one, the wind doesn't really tell you. I mean, that's really when it comes down to it, outside.
And that's what we struggle with, because, you know, so if I'm gonna go in and, you know, create an opening in this building, do I need to evacuate the building? Do I need to take and danger tape off, you know, 20 meters, you know, circumference around it? I mean, there's no, I mean, unless you test every single, you know, square foot of that job, you don't really know. And so you just, I mean, we just have to use our best judgment on, you know, who's being exposed.
And that's, it all comes down to dust control. Use the engineering methods, which is your integrated water or vacuum. You've just eliminated the dust. That's a statics, guys. They don't see a dust, everything else looks good, you don't open the door. And that's what I was talking about is, I had a contractor call me and said, hey, you know, you guys walked into a building, they're cutting out something in the floor, we're mechanical, we walk in the room and there's dust hanging everywhere. What do? They weren't using the wet method, they weren't doing anything. The contractor was doing the cutting, but they were exposed to it. So luckily, they did the training beforehand. So the foreman called back to the office. He said, okay, I'll call the GC, and for now you guys go and start prepping and getting everything ready. That way they weren't in the area. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, good question.
What about protecting the owner of the public, the owner's employees? Or what are your obligations to put up signs or fence areas off?
Well, first, are you going to control the dust? If you control the dust, then it's almost a moot point.
You've got a hammer and you can't make a lot of things.
That's where you do the vacuum.
You talking about a hammer drill? Yeah, they make pepper backs that actually fit right on the hammer drill, so when you pull a trigger, the battery runs the back.
They do have shrouds too aftermarket. That's fairly inexpensive. Not the vacuum, but the shrouds. But that's, again, that's the first thing. And it actually says you cannot just throw a mask on everybody. You actually have to use engineered controls. That you're required to use some type of engineered controls. So that's the problem. And as far as what is your responsibility to the owner and others, there is. Because you are creating a hazard. You go to the multi-employer job site standard, which talks about 4 different types of employers. First is the creating, the employer that creates the hazard. Second is the affected, the employer who has employees affected by the hazard. The third is the general or controlling employer. They are supposed to make sure nothing happens. And then the fourth one is if you do hire outside person to help correct or safety, then all 4 have liability for any time there's one hazard. So, are you one of those? Are you more than one? That's what it goes back.
As far as the competent person, what kind of training, or do they have to have OSHA training, or what does that come down to for them?
Competent person defined by OSHA is, and I'm paraphrasing, someone who can recognize or predict hazards and has the authority to correct it. So, it doesn't specifically say what type of training they must have or what type of experience, but can they recognize the hazard? So do they understand what respirable silica is? Do they understand what the responsibilities of the employer are? That's what we have to.
And they have to be designated that also.
They have to be given authority. Hey, make sure that we're square on silica. Questions? Come on.
You guys familiar with the they've come out with like an integrated hard hat, mask, kind of ties around the neck, and it's got tubes that run it
With the backpack style?
with the backpacks. Or, yeah.
Scuba tank?
I thought it was backward.
Yeah, everything's supply, yeah. What about it?
Are those acceptable? I mean, according to the manufacturers, they're acceptable. You know, the thing we struggle with, you know, respirator programs is you look at half the people in here and they don't have facial hair. And in this industry, if you tell your lead operators, hey, you gotta go inside this building, you need to shave your beard, they're like, no, I'm gonna take that day off. You know,
Yeah, when it talks about if you do use integrated, if you're indoors and you have to have an APF of 10. APF is the assigned protection factor for a respirator. So you look at the respirators and you see what they're rated for. And they do have an APF 10, 100, things of that nature. For facial hair, about the only thing you can do is a positive air pressure, because there is no face seal required. There is no face to mask seal. So you have to have something that will provide a positive air, which pushes the air away from it. Any one of those would work. As long as you look at the manufacturer, you do it the way it is, and you see what the APF is. If it's anything above 10, it means or exceeds the standard. Does that make sense? You guys are all experts now, right? What about any experiences or difficulties that you've had? Or have you just said, I'll wait until they actually start writing the citations? What have you done to try to meet the requirements? Anyone?
Spent quite a bit of money to get engineering controls in place to meet table 1.
The problem with table 1 that I find is if you're using table 1, you have said that I have employees who are going to be exposed. Is that correct? So then that medical surveillance kicks in, doesn't it? So now the question is, how do you track who has been exposed? Or do you just do anybody and everybody? They all get medical surveillance. How do you track it? How can you prove? Nah, he's only done that twice this year. Burden of proof is on you, isn't it? Well, how do you track it, or do you? Ask them. You have a cost.
It's a pretty vague requirement without any solid answer.
Yeah. Well, I think we did.
I mean, what is close to the best way to handle it? You say, hey, if you're not feeling good, let me know, and we get to the doctor, we'll have it checked out.
It has to be available in the training. You have to let them know what to do if there's an issue, if they've been exposed to it. If you have a Silica program, all that should be covered in there.
Well, it talks about the employer shall make surveillance available at no cost to employees at reasonable time and place for each employee who will be required under section to use a respirator more than 30 days. So if you're doing APF of 10 and you're cutting quickie saw indoors, you put a respirator on them, whatever that may be, how do you track that they've been exposed 30 days or not? Just in a minute. I would say one of the easiest things that I've thought about was put a cost code. One that does nothing more than say, use the respirator. So then whenever they turn it in, that way you can track it. I don't know. I've tried to think about how to answer some of these.
I'm taking off at 29 days.
Yes. And Matt, you said it's good if you cover it in your safety or your Silica schedule. I would assume that's the hiring phase.
Well, when you implement your Silica plan, you're going to come up with an ACP, which is is your exposure control plan, and that's gonna be implemented into your safety manual. So when you do go through your orientation, or however you go through your orientations, like we put them through an OSHA 10 before they ever go out into the field, and part of that OSHA 10 is going through UCI safety culture and our orientation, which goes over our manual. In our manual is our ECP, and so we go through it at that phase as well. And then we do monthly training topics, so is one of them, and we also do our competent person training, which would be part of that training as well.
So you keep the topic, and the guys who could be exposed, you keep the topic revisited throughout the years, not just time.
And that's the best training, is those things that they're exposed to, the hazards are exposed to, go over it. If not monthly, every other month at least. That way, it's in the forefront of their mind. Think about it.
And for us, for us, that type of training, it's given to everybody. Even, we may have, 20 people in our organization that will never be exposed to it, and we even give it to our office workers. So it's given to everybody throughout our entire organization, so no matter what, we're covered.
Also, if you do the training, make sure they sign something, test them, because if they don't sign, you didn't do it. It's one of the biggest things probably a lot of people do. They'll spend time on doing the training, spending the money, doing everything, and then there's no competency for proof that you did the training. So, if you do it during orientation, if you do it during a job meeting or whatever, make sure they all sign in. So, hey, you received the training, here's the documentation, because I assure you, if OSHA does come out to a job site, they will ask you.
How long do you need to keep those records on the two boards?
5 year
5 years for safety retention.
5 year retention.
Now, if you're talking about medical is for the lifetime plus
30 years of post-employment for any medical surveillance or any exposure.
But the thing with the medical records, you're not actually going to get medical records when you do medical evaluations. The evaluator, the medical facility, they're actually going to keep those records, and all they're going to give the employer is, they won't give them the results, they'll give them
Their recommendations, recommendations and stuff like that. They won't give you the actual physical health of that.
But they'll basically give you the baseline of where they're starting out as far as their.
They'll keep the baseline, they'll give you, like he was talking about.
You'll be able to see baseline of the lung function testing, but they won't give you any other past history or current history of that.
You'll get recommendations, and that's really all you're going to get.
You may just get results that says this employee is fine to use a respirator, or they should avoid using that.
Well, if you recommend people, if they think they're exposed to it, get the air quality sampling done.
Burden of proof is on you. Unfortunately, that's what it comes down to. Are your controls adequate? Did you do an honest effort? If you did, how do you prove it? Yes or no? So
they're still pretty much running with the good faith clause right now too. So if you're trying, you're implementing everything, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing on that part of it. If you got records of all that, they're still pretty much going along with the good faith right now.
Again, is there dust? Nope. Conversation probably wouldn't come up. If there is dust, then you're going to have to have that conversation. Or if you're doing quickie saw indoors with the vacuum, and you guys aren't wearing a respirator, right? But if you did an air monitoring, that said, nope, no exposure, then they don't have to have it. So, to me, spend the money, get the monitoring, therefore, masks aren't required, medical surveillance not required. All that other nasty, costly crap is gone, because you did something up front. Now, the testing says, similar activities, similar environment. You don't have to test every single time you do a job. You just have to make sure that it's annotated what the conditions and what the activities are. So,
And as far as the testing goes, you can get with a lot of your insurance companies, your insurance providers, they will help you out with that monitor. They'll help you out, they'll send you the equipment. A lot of the insurance companies actually have the actual monitoring equipment, and they'll send it to you. So
Is that something new? Because I know that, you know, when this has been in the works for 10 plus years, but, you know, when this first, you know, was June and then got pushed to September, you know, we approached our insurance company, you know, trying to get a consortium of people to come together and, you know, split the costs of it. That never happened, which tells me, you know, I know that they don't have the monitoring equipment.
And that's what I say, it kind of depends on what insurance company you have.
but there are also,
Depends on what.
there are also some equipment suppliers that will rent those too.
What does it, I mean, Matt, you said you've had it done. What's the cost?
There's $1,000.
It depends on what you have done, how many you have done, but it's about $1,000 per test.
And that is an annual test that needs to be done?
No,
If it shows positive.
below your PEL, below your action level, then if it's below 25 micrograms, another test does have to be done. If it's above the 25, then you have to have it done every 6 months. If it's below the PEL, above the PEL, 3 months.
So
Until you get 2 consecutive below the action level, then you don't have to do it again.
So and this is just a
Sure.
question that I don't expect you to answer, but, you know, we rely on our manufacturers, you know, so if I'm using Husqvarna equipment and I say, Husqvarna, you know, we're using your high cycle wall saw,
Right.
you know, what's your testing? They've tested it, they know exactly what it is, but, you know, that's no good in their eyes. I mean, it's on our, you know, it's our burden to prove that, and they don't take the manufacturer's testing results into it.
We did bring that up to the area director. If you are relying on just manufacturer's testing, that is not passable. Because the controls, the environment, the activity changes from, I mean, even the atmosphere, the air density, there's so many variables that has to be similar in region, similar in.
Well, I mean, my question is, I mean, okay, quickie saws, that's one thing.
Yeah.
You know, Still, Husqvarna, Makita, you know, everybody makes a quickie saw, it's on table one. Wall sawing is not on table one. Everybody makes a wall saw. What's the difference? If you're gonna accept quickie saw being on table one, but wall saw is not on table one, and we've got to do this burden of proof on everything, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. So why don't you fix that?
Yeah, I know.
Hey, keep that information from the manufacturer though, because that is secondary information that those
Yes,
did.
it will support it.
And we do.
Information.
And we do. We have not hired anybody to test because of,
Honestly though, I would highly recommend it. I mean, you know, if you think you are, like when we ran our testing, we had the worst possible case scenario, enclosed room, sanding. I mean, so, you know, if we're outside now working and we're doing those, we're not too worried about it because we did it in the very worst case scenario that you could be in on a finisher or anything like that. So I would get it done.
And I'm Jamie with M6. That's what we do is concrete cutting. So, you know, our CSDA, which is Concrete Sawing and Drilling Association, we've been on this for years. We've been talking about it for years. We know, you know, cutting concrete, you need to have water just for the cooling factor. So we don't do anything dry. You know, however, you know, we've got to make our, you know, it's got to be a financially responsible decision to, you know, do you spend, you know, $15,000 to have it tested, or do you look at the manufacturers who have done the same exact thing and done it in an enclosed environment where there's no, you know, that have tested it and it falls below the levels.
You can pick and choose what area you want tested too. Like, you know, you can get 3 things, random things, and like I said, it's about $1,000.
Who do you use?
Can I give a name?
Or tell me.
There's several out there, and
I'll give it to
he
you.
can give to you. But for for you, you'd probably do four, maybe 5 things, I think. You did those tests. I think it'd be good.
And if you're using water, I mean,
Yeah.
you're good.
So does he have to test for every one of his saws?
No.
No.
Just anything that's
Similar
not on the
environment,
table.
similar activity.
Similar.
So if he's coring inside, if he is free cutting, if he is block cutting, if he is, so choose those.
Yeah, because I'm thinking if I've got a Hilti hammer drill with a shroud and vacuum,
Right.
and then I use it to wall, I may not get the same results.
You don't have to. No. It doesn't have to be by brand. Similar activity, similar environment. So that's what I said. If you do, take a look at your things that aren't on here, and I'd use a quickie saw indoors, integrated, you're done. Never have to wear a mask again. But, yeah, that's just one of those things. It's all about risk appetite. If I spend $15,000 to make the test, or do I get caught once where the OSHA citation for Sirius went up this month? It's now $13,000. And if it is a repeat, which is the same or similar within 5 years, it's $130,000. So,
You can buy a lot of tests and quickly solve your problems.
any other questions? No?
Do you see this being, I mean, so we're year and almost a half into it. I mean, is this, when you go to your, safety conventions, or, I mean, is this still prevalent? I mean, is this still what everybody's talking about?
Right now, everyone's talking about crane.
Just because of all the incidents?
Well, no, the operator qualification went into effect December. And they threw another wonderful aspect to it, is now you have to do a performance evaluation on all your operators written by February 8th, I think it is. So right now everyone's scrambling because all their equipment, all the crane operators have to have a third-party certification.
I think that's still facing lawsuits, isn't it?
It's still in effect though. Until it gets overturned or repealed, it's still in effect. So they can enforce it.
You have a separate written evaluation other than the certification, or they have certification?
Certification and a written evaluation, both. Has to be documented. Yep, they threw that in there. They took away the weight. So before, when it was originally written in 2010, is had to be the crane type and also had to be the weight. So if you had a 20-ton and a 100-ton, same model, same, but different weight classification, you had to have certification for both. They threw away the weight certification, threw it out, but then they put in a written evaluation that's required. So NCCO, NCCR, the only two that's accepted. So all crane operators have to have that. I'm not going to be interested to see how the unions fare with that too. Because most of them don't. They do their own internal